how contracting impacts your work, and then also the importance of working agreements with those groups, and then to think about, as we work with groups, how do we do that from a developmental group process. So the first thing is, I would like to know what you think facilitation is. I'm not looking for a long definition here, but what is, half a sentence, what do you think facilitation is? Write that right in the chat box. What is facilitation? Helping groups to reach a stated goal, helping others participate in that decision making, guiding and supporting the group discussions, herding cats. There's a great video out there about herding cats, cowboys herding cats. It looks like some meetings I've been in. Any other thoughts around what facilitation is? Guiding, supporting, helping, saying with folks with decision making and supporting them. Okay, great. So I would like to share with you what a textbook definition of facilitation that I use, where it's both the design and management of structures and processes that help the group do its work and minimize the problems, common problems that people have working together to increase its effectiveness. So it's both design and management of both structures and processes that are going to help the group. So as you had mentioned in your definitions, it is that whole piece around helping the group. So if we have what facilitation is, then we have those qualities of a facilitator. If we're having facilitation, there's going to be a facilitator. What are some of those qualities that you would see in a facilitator? And then I inserted that word desired. What are some of those qualities that you can see or that you would wish to have in a facilitator? Write those right in the chat box. Good listener, guide, focus people, a synthesizer, cares for the group and for the individual, cares for their needs. Effective interpersonal skills. Caring, being effective, protects the process. Synthesize, again, synthesizer and listener. Okay, so as I look at what it is that you've said, it looks like what you're saying is that those qualities are going to help the group increase its effectiveness. And as it increases its effectiveness, it's going to improve both the process and the structure that's happening in there. One of the things that I like to think about a quality of a facilitator is that the facilitator intervenes in a manner or in a way that teaches the group skills. It strengthens the skills. As Mary mentioned at the top of this, it's strengthening your muscle, your facilitation muscle. And when the group's muscles are being strengthened in facilitation, it decreases the need for always having to pull in an outside facilitator. The other piece around the qualities of a facilitator that was not mentioned here is that sometimes there's the wish that a facilitator would be neutral in guiding that process, which leads me to this whole question around if I'm going to be creating capacity, I have to be curious. And I think about that as a facilitation curtain. And so as we were thinking about those qualities of the facilitator, I would like to turn that as that we're going to take a curtain and pull that aside. And if I'm pulling aside the curtain of what it is that we have done thus far, whereas in the second slide I asked where you worked, the types of groups you worked with, how many times you facilitated, and then what facilitation was, and in the 6th slide, the desired qualities of the facilitator. As I think about what I did after you responded, I was reading or summarizing or synthesizing or just kind of flitting through some of what it was that you had said. I was not really saying, great, good, yes, that's correct, or anything. I'm simply validating what it is that you're saying as the facilitator. I'm being curious, I'm gathering information, and by not proposing a judgment on what it is that you've said by saying, good, yes, that's right, that's what I think, is I'm not trying to align with you or having that perception that I'm aligning with anyone as the facilitator. And that's how I try when I'm doing my facilitation, is to try to have that neutrality show up in my language, and it is very, very difficult for me not to say good or I agree or any of those other words which are casting a judgment. What I'm trying to do as a facilitator is to be curious, and at the same time, by peeking behind that facilitation curtain, is to, as I'm being curious, is to try to build that capacity. So as I work with this, one of the first questions that always comes up is, do you think a member of the group can be the facilitator, particularly when I spoke about some people wanting the group facilitator to be neutral. So do you think a member of the group can be the facilitator? And Mary is going to help us by having a poll. Okay, so I see Fran has gone right into the chat with a C.
You can also,
there is, right at the top of the page.
Yeah, at the top of the page, yep. Under the participant list, where you see the little icons, there's a happy icon, happy face, and there's a little number A in a box. And if you hover over that, it will be a drop-down box, and you can pick. You can vote that way as well.
Right, and. Okay, so I'm seeing that we are having a variety of responses. Is that we have the yes, the no, and the maybe. So this is great. So here I am being the judgment person here. This is great of having this variety in here. So now in the chat box, what I'd like you to do is to say, what are some of the reasons of why you said yes, no, or maybe? So chat right in really briefly. Why did you say yes? Why did you say no? Or why did you say maybe? Right in the chat box. I see people writing. Couldn't be the contributor and be neutral. Any others? Depends on the topic of the meeting. Oh gosh. So this, as the facilitator of this meeting, is that, how do I read quickly here? Depends on the topic of the meeting and the skill of the facilitator. It depends on the nature of the work.
You can also scroll up, Jane.
Yes, I am.
Okay, if you miss some.
Yeah, I'm scrolling up. So it depends on the nature of the work. And that may enable the member to facilitate while having time to input. It can be done if someone doesn't have a horse in the race or doesn't desire to participate in the discussion or minimally. I'm confused. I meant to put maybe. Competition felt by other members of the group. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Okay. So those are some of our reasons for doing this, which brings me to this next frequently asked question, that if it's you think, for the person who said no, that you couldn't, then you would have to bring in a facilitator. Of when you would bring in someone from the outside to do facilitating, for those reasons where you said no or maybe that I can't, or maybe a member of the group cannot, that list that you were creating in the sidebar becomes the list of reasons why it's helpful to bring in someone from the outside to do that facilitating. And from the outside, it is where the person who said that there's a horse in the group or that there's competition in there, it's outside of that group. One of the resources that I have provided that's on the website is a list that was a list of reasons that was compiled by the participants in the most recent group, the facilitation training, Strengthening Your Facilitation Skills Level 1, of when and why to use an outside facilitator. And I'm sharing the list of what they said rather than say an experts list or a list from a textbook, is because those are the real life feelings of citizens who are in the midst of training to become citizen facilitators, and they're in the midst of needing a facilitator. And they know that that facilitator cannot be them because they do have that horse in the race, or because there's a great deal of conflict in there, or there's a great deal of input that needs to be done, there's sensitive topics that are there, that whole piece around competition, and whatever the nature of that whole topic is. So I'm sharing that list because it is right from the grassroots parts of the thinking from the community. And when you get a chance to read through those, because I'm not entirely positive you have those in front of you, for me, those reasons to bring in an outside facilitator drop into some reasons, some categories, which you were stating, is that everyone needs to participate, and you were saying that in a variety of different ways of needing to have everyone have the input, or it's a sensitive issue, that you might need a neutral guide, that there's a conflict. One of you mentioned that there was conflict and that you really needed to be mapped through that, and that there perhaps is a direction. So for some of you, when you're talking about the nature of the meeting, it might be a new direction that is going to be sought by the group that is there. And of course there are lots of other reasons, and you are stating those. One of the resources that I like to use is Dee Kelsey and Pam Plum's book, Great Meetings, Great Results. And they say keep the option open of bringing in an outside facilitator if you or others in the group have strong opinions about an outcome, or if you have strong feelings about another participant, so that your energy is freed up to participate in the meeting's the content of that meeting. And they summarized that by saying that it is a sign of wisdom and not weakness to let someone else facilitate in certain circumstances. And so when you were talking about that there are certain natures or meeting natures or topics, that those are those certain circumstances. And again, there is a handout that talks about when to use an outside facilitator. So if you're going to use an outside facilitator and someone has asked you to facilitate, so here's someone out there that has asked you to facilitate, what is it that you need to know about the group that you are facilitating? So again, in the chat box, write a half sentence about what it is that you need to know about that group that you will be facilitating. History, weaknesses, goals, strengths, What is it that you need to know? Everything Fran said. Anything else that you need to know? Other than the history, strengths, weaknesses, and goals, their background, why they are meeting, their purpose, personality types, conflicts between board members. Anything else? Timelines. Constraints. Does that group have any constraints? Does it have a timeline? Does it need to get that decision made by a certain month or day or week? Okay. So as I'm thinking about this, I like to think about this as when I'm asking these questions and being curious, understanding the goal of the facilitation, yes. As I am looking at the questions that I'm asking and what it is that I need to know about the group, I call this contracting or facilitation contracting, and in its most basic sense, as it says on the slide, it's an agreement between the facilitator and the group, or the group members, about how to work together and what is going to be accomplished. So this asking of questions and finding out about the group is a way for you to assess that group, because different groups, as you know, different groups in meetings and those situations, when you say depends on the situation or the circumstance, requires different activities and processes. So when we go back to that definition of facilitation about it being the design of both the processes and the structures, asking questions will help you find those things out. And it allows you and the group or the contact from that group to agree about who's going to be responsible for what. And as someone said, it is a way for you to know what that situation is. Is there anything fiery going on? Is there anything that's kind of lazy that's going on in the group? And as this contracting or the questioning proceeds, it's a way for you and the group, and really it's important for the group or the group contact to get clear on what its situation is. So it's a pre-meeting conversation to find out what it is that the group really wants. And when I think about contracting, I see that my questions, when I meet with a new group or a group contact, I have multiple questions. It's just like an intake form when I go to the dentist or the eye doctor. And I have categorized the questions and individualized them for my own style. And some of these questions are found on a handout, again, in the resources that are on the website. It's called Group Assessment Questions. And those questions are not categorized, but when I have my form, I categorize them into 5 different categories, basically. And in the purpose, what are those key issues that the group is dealing with? Do they need to make a decision? And I think someone had mentioned the decisions and are there conflicts. So it is that whole purpose. And then the objective is, what is it that you really want to achieve? And if the meeting was successful, would that be obvious to all of the participants, whatever was produced, what the outcomes were, and so on? Really digging into who is the client. Is it the person that you're meeting with, that contact? Is that person the one who really has the goal for the group to do the work, and that is the primary person that you're working to achieve whatever her or his goals are. But then there are going to be other members in the group, and so how familiar are those people with each other? And within that group, are there primary players in that group, and then others are secondary to that? And how is it that people feel about coming to this meeting? Is it a mandatory meeting? Is it a meeting that they had a choice about coming to? Have they been appointed to be on this meeting? meeting panel or whatever. And when they're doing that, how is it that they feel about doing this work, whether it's strategic planning, trying to develop a new process for their community around recycling, whatever that is. And then, what is the story to date? This is the history, I think, that one person had mentioned. Find out as much about the group about it as you can. Does the group have strengths? Does it have weaknesses? Has it had successes in the past? Do they make decisions? Have they made decisions? How do they make those decisions? Do they have working agreements or norms? Are people honest with each other? If they have been meeting in the past, is there a level of trust? Are they open? And then finally, who is going to be responsible for doing what? Who gets the agenda out? Who can contact different people if there are going to be supplies and so on? Who is going to do what? So when you get the answers to these questions in this whole contracting phase, being curious about the group, not only are you building your capacity, but you're building the group's capacity to do the work for which it's coming together. Back in March of 2011, there was a webinar that was part of this series. It was called Leading from Any Chair. It was done by Martha Walker from Virginia Tech, and she also has a fact sheet that says that's called Questions That Facilitators Ask, which might be helpful for you. And as I'm looking at this, one of the key contracting questions that I always like to hear about is, does the group have ground rules or working agreements, norms, whatever it is that they might call those. So I'm wondering, as you think about the groups that you work with, a primary group that you work with, do you use working agreements? So this could be a primary group that you're with either as a leader or a member. And I'm thinking that you can either chat this in, or Mary could help us out with a poll that has A, B, C, and D, where does the primary group you work with use working agreements either yes, no, maybe, or you don't know. And you can either chat that in or do that as a poll. Okay. Okay, so people are popping in here. So we have an A, a B, a C, and a D. Great. All right. So some people, when I am working with a group and doing the contracting, they say, which brings me to my next frequently asked questions, what is a working agreement? Or what is a ground rule? Or what is the difference between them? And the way I like to think about the difference between ground rules and working agreements is that ground rules describe specific behaviors, whereas working agreements describe more about the environment that you are working in, and how that environment helps you feel safe so that you can do the work that you have to do, whether it's discovery or creativity or learning. So thanks for participating in that poll of saying that whether you do use working agreements, whether you don't, whether you sometimes use them, or whether you don't know whether you use them. Again, when I work with groups, a lot of times they don't know what those are, whether they do work with them or not. But what I do know is that if there are working agreements, and as the group is doing its work, as I'm working with it, and they stray into behaviors that I feel are not helpful to the group, then the working agreements or the ground rules allow me as the facilitator, and it actually allows others in the group to help pull the group back to its work. So for instance, if one of the working agreements was to stay on task, and the group starts talking about the hockey game that is going to be happening tomorrow night, because well, one of our working agreements is that we're going to stay on task, and perhaps during the break we can talk about the hockey game. Might not work quite that smoothly, but that is a thought. So as we're looking at those, what are some of your favorite working agreements and ground rules? Just chat those right in. And Erin, thank you for mentioning the book about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Thank you. Great. And Frances said that her maybe was that the group had worked together so long that our norms are unstated. Ground rule, be present. Thank you, Angela. Everyone should have a chance to speak and be heard without interruption. Speak up, stand down. Listen carefully. Be open-minded, be respectful. Define the role, a working agreement to define the role of the players. Stay on task and on time. This is a rich list of working agreements that are your favorites. Thanks. So of course, as you share yours, I would like to share mine. So some of my favorite working agreements right now are listen to understand. Sometimes I have to say a bit more about that, about being curious and listening without judging. Everyone gets to participate. Differences of opinion are useful and natural. And be brief and share airtime. So those are just some of my current working ones. And there's a group I'll be working with on Friday with a colleague, and we're using variations of a couple of these. So the thought becomes, do the same working agreements work with every group? And as you know, that's absolutely not. But when you're contracting with a group, and by being curious and asking questions, you get to take that peek behind that group's curtain and ascertain what working agreements might work with that group. Working agreements, and this is just a thought, an opinion, working agreements that are developed by the group and determine how the group will work together generally describe what positive behaviors that they want to see in their group meetings. And they're most effective if they're simple, and the working agreements that you were stating is like for staying on task and staying on time, and some of these others, be present. Oh gosh, as I'm trying to scroll here at the same time, be open-minded, be respectful. Those are simple. They are direct, and if your list of working agreements is limited in number, they become more memorable. Working agreements that are most effective is if they are enforceable, and the other part is if your working agreements can be stated in 30 seconds or less, so that if a new person comes into the room, you can tell them our working agreements are listen to understand. Everyone gets to participate. Differences of opinion are useful as well as natural, and we're going to be brief and share the airtime. So those are just some thoughts around that. I also would like to just ask or say that with working agreements comes another frequently asked question for me is, as I'm doing the contracting, people say, well, how do you get working agreements, or how does a group get working agreements? So what I'd like to do is to have your thoughts on how your groups get working agreements. And you can think of all of the different groups that you work with. How is it that they get working agreements? Let's do some sharing here. How is it that your groups get working agreements? Chat that right into the chat box. How is it? Group brainstorming. What else? How do you get working agreements? The facilitator suggests working agreements. Any other thoughts? I think I see a couple of people writing. Sometimes I draft, and the group revises them at the suggestion of the facilitator. May or may not use the group time to create, but will ask for consensus or any issues. Okay, thanks. I too, of course, have some thoughts on how to come up with working agreements, and I've simplified them into 3 different ways to get working agreements, which you all have stated. Either the facilitator arrives with the working agreements, and I generally do this if it's going to be a short meeting, perhaps a one-time event. I, from contracting, have figured out, I think these are the working agreements that will work, and I come in with those, have them posted. Actually, I actually put them on the agenda prior to the meeting so people will know what they are, and then I said, do these work with you, and get that consensus around that. Or as I think as Mary was suggesting, I have a short list of working agreements, and it sounds like she uses a process, perhaps uses a process to either expand those or refine them. But then but basically, a way I've seen it is the facilitator has a short list, and then some type of small group process narrows that short list to an even shorter list. Sometimes they'll do this for a full day meeting, or if it's short multi-meeting processes, or if that group needs to develop a little bit of group process muscle, I will have them do that. A third way is that the facilitator uses some sort of process, and it was suggested as a brainstorming for the group to develop its own agreements. And if I particularly use this if the group is meeting over a long span of time, it really needs to develop ownership in what its process is and how it is going to work together to do the work that it is charged with. I do have a handout, it's a multi-paged handout. Again, and I think that's what Mary was putting in the chat box is the link to where these handouts can be found. And the handout is called Working Agreements, and I wrote it because there were so many people who wanted to know how they could work with their groups to develop working agreements. And I've outlined how to do these 3 different processes, and there's even some scripting of how you might do that and small group process in how to do that. Which leads me to, back to thinking about contracting of, so with the contracting, one of the key contracting questions was whether the group had its own working agreements or norms or ground rules. But another key question for me is how long has the group been meeting, and what are the behaviors and challenges that come along with that. I like to look at this through the lens of group development or a developmental stage, the developmental stage that the group is in. And I've just seen that Mary over on the side has said the handouts are available along with the recording, and hopefully that's going to be by the end of this week. Thanks, Mary, for chatting that in. So going back to the contracting question of how long the group has been meeting, in looking at this through a developmental phase, I'm pretty sure that a lot of us have heard about the stages of groups that was proposed by Tuckman and his associates called forming, storming, norming, and performing, and then some years after the original 4 were proposed, a 5th, which is called adjourning, was proposed, of acknowledging that groups don't need to keep meeting if the job or the decision or the task of the group is complete. So if, as I'm doing the contracting and as I am asking my questions in the contracting, and I'm hearing about the behaviors and challenges from the group and looking at it through one lens that might be called the developmental stage, and if I understand the developmental stages of group development, and if I also am finding out by being curious and looking behind the curtain for that group of some of the processes and group management techniques that have been used in the past, then hopefully I can design a process that is going to be constructive and effective for that group in an environment where they can do their work. So let's just quickly look at some of these characteristics. Quick definitions of forming groups require lots of structure. They perhaps are coming together for the first time or the first couple of times. There's that whole sense of, do I belong in this group? Do I have something to contribute to this group? It is that ritual sniffing phase of groups. So as the facilitator, there really need to be some very concrete processes around introductions, orientations, a roadmap. What is it that we're going to be doing today through an agenda, warm-up activities, establishing those working agreements or ground rules if you are, and then talk about how decisions are going to be made, really formalized structures. Storming groups need to be led or facilitated more aggressively. This is when conflict starts to show up, and the conflict can either be pointed toward other members of the group, or the facilitator can be the magnet for that conflict that is manifesting and the disagreements that are surfacing. So again, the facilitator needs to be really comfortable and knowledgeable about what it is that has gone on in the group, separating the problems in the group from the people in the group, knowing what the working agreements are and enforcing those, and really trying to be as assertive as possible, and knowing that you're not the target, but it is the situation in the group that needs to be resolved. Norming groups have moved along and are more open to assessing and improving their processes. The facilitator is not needed nearly as much as in the performing groups, where they've learned to manage their conflicts and have developed that high level of interpersonal skills, which Fran had mentioned back with sometimes with the working agreements, that the group has been meeting so long that perhaps those norms are unstated, and they're just assumed to be there. So that with both norming and performing, that there's that mirroring back to the group, not enforcing but affirming the work that is helpful to the group that is happening, maybe suggesting alternative structures that might be more effective, and generally staying out of the way. So I'd like to try to do something that I've not tried this with a webinar, but I'd like to try this with groups that I work with. I always have an activity when we're talking about group stages where I have a bag or a basket of props. And so this is a very small amount of props here. But what if you were thinking about those stages of groups, forming, storming, norming, and performing, and you had this object, and you had an object, and it had to speak about a group stage, what would it be? So what I would like to try to do is to have you select one of these props or these photos. And so there, for those who might be wondering, what the heck are these? One is a rubber duck. In the upper right-hand corner is some bubble wrap, and as we circle around counterclockwise, there's a paintbrush. In the center is a tiny little bell, and then there's also a ball of string. So what I would like you to do is to say, name a prop, name which stage of group development you think it aligns with and why that is happening. So we're going to see how this works with a webinar. And as you know, in any group meeting process, you have different designs. Does it work? Does it not work? So thanks, Erin, for jumping in here and starting with this. Select a prop and suggest to you which stage it might be and why that is. Whoops. Paintbrush is the forming stage. Mary is now jumping in as Julie. Okay, so Erin, I'd like you to say why that is a forming stage. So all of you, so as you're talking about this, now why is that? It's easy to get all tangled up. Tangled string is storming. It's easy to get all tangled up. So why is the paintbrush, I see the bell as calling the group to order, a formative stage. Bubble wrap is storming. Ball of twine is storming. So what are you thinking about those? Why is it like that? String is forming, used in different ways to provide structure. The bubble wrap could be norming and protected. You need to pick the people and start placing things on the canvas to begin the process with the paintbrush. Popping the bubbles could be storming. This is working. This is exactly what happens when we're all live face to face. So thanks. Thanks for doing that. What I would, and I see that we're coming up on about 10 minutes before the end here. What I would like to say is, as you look at this, as we go back up and look at these, there were several different objects here that were suggested as being forming, several different that could be storming. So this is where I really wish we could turn on our voices, but we're not, so we'll be having our voices come through our fingers. As you look at what people said about the prompts as they related to a stage of group, what does that tell you about how this group that is listening to this webinar, what does it tell you about how we look at objects? Everything is open here. How does this, what does it tell us about how we look at objects, and how does it relate to how we all are in a meeting? I'd like to just hear some free-forming thinking here. And says you can see the differences. It's the Aaron is writing. So I'm seeing that having a hard time hearing me. Mary, I don't know if that is you that needs to be helping me out with that, or whether that's me. Julie, as made the differences into things, whether they're objects, we need to dig deeper into understanding each other. My sound is getting muddled. All right. I will try to slow my thinking down. So we see there are many tools to form and facilitate a group. Yes, there are lots of different ways that we can form a group, depending on the group. What we have found out in the contracting phase, as we're looking to see what the story is, we can see what is going on. I'm going to try turning off my talk button and then turn it back on. So I'm now going off, and now I'm coming back on. So Mary, I will let you give me a heads up of whether that is working or not. So thanks for saying how this turns out in just using ourselves as a demonstration of how we look at objects. We all have different and unique styles of how to facilitate, and how we gather the information, the questions that we ask, the curiosity that we have is going to give us the information of how to develop a design and a process to meet the group's needs. So what I would like to do is since I don't want to really maybe have the same thing happen again with the tone, is that our goals were to consider how contracting impacts your work with the group. So the thought is, do you use contracting or not? Do you ask those questions? How curious do you get? Do you have a checklist for finding out? The importance of working agreements. If you have working agreements, what are they? How do you switch them up for different groups? How do you help groups have working agreements? How do you use them and adhere to them? How do you help the group adhere to those working agreements? And learning how the group's developmental stage impacts the group's process. If the group is just forming, you need to be there more assertively and more in front of the group than you do with a group that has been around for a long time. So those were our goals. And to end, I would like to take you out with giving you two books that are by New England authors, Kelsey and Plum's Great Meeting, Great Results, and Craig Freshley's The Wisdom of Good Group Decisions. So these are great resources for groups, so that if a group needs a resource in how it might function a little bit better, these are very inexpensive local authors who do great work, and they can be shared with groups that you work with. One of the other pieces is when managing groups. One of the effective processes is to have openings as well as closings. Two other handouts that I have for you. One is about openings. The openings bring the person who is attending the meeting mentally into that meeting. Is connecting that person with the meeting, with the content, with the context, and also connects them with the other participants. And an effective closing helps participants to identify what is valuable and relevant. So I'm going to try a really quick closing with you, and that's, I would like you to select one of these closing topics, whether it's a fact, something that you know now that you didn't know before, a question that you still have, an aha, some new idea that popped into your person as you were going through this webinar, or an action that you're going to take as a result of attending this webinar. So check those right in, and it can be one or the other. So Fran says an action she's going to take is to select a set of basic working agreements to start from. Any others? I see other people writing here. What are some others? Trying to get my... You're welcome. It is a refresher. It was a refresher for me as well. We all have these retreats that come up. Aha, continue. Whoops, an action. We'll get new ways to develop working agreements. Stages of groups. How do you suggest to a small group that you work with that you'd like to develop a working agreement? And there was, that Mary had said one that I just scooted right over. And aha, continue to get more clarity on the difference between working agreements and ground rules. Yes. Yes. Okay. Thanks. And I have a quote for you. And it's actually a challenge. And the way so the quote is, "It is often easy to overlook the world that exists outside our daily routines. It shimmers in our peripheral vision, it flits through our subconscious, and tugs gently at our senses, but rarely do we give it our undivided attention. When I'm contracting with a group, it is that group that has all of its stories and pieces and parts, all that I need to be curious about, that can just shimmer in my peripheral vision, slip through my subconscious, but it's tugging at my senses, knowing that I need to give that group my undivided attention when I am with it. at that particular time. So I'm seeing I'm up at 11:58 according to my time. And Angela is asking, will the slides be available? Mary says yes, it's going to be archived. And I think Mary said hopefully by the end of the week. So Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you.
You are a master of time management in addition to facilitation, Jane.
Mary, I did a radio show for 11 and a half years, so I was always watching it.
You have a great intuition. So this is your opportunity. Any last-minute questions that you didn't get answered that you'd like to, feel free to set those down in the chat box. And just quick poll. Very quickly, you already know how to do the poll. I've already set it up for you. As a result of the webinar, yes, I learned some new information today. You knew it already, or no, you still need a lot more information about this. If you could just give us a quick using the poll there, and thank you very much. It just gives us a little bit of quick feedback, and that is perfect. Thank you. And let me advance. And again, let me set the poll back up again for you. Yes. Okay, yes, you learned new resources. You knew the resources already, or you still have a lot more information. Oops, I have to clear you out. I'm sorry. There you go. And while you're filling out that one, I just want to say thank you to Jane for joining us on this, well, I don't know if it's a cold day where you are. It's cold here. It was warm yesterday. But
I think it's a matter of perspective.
Let's just say crazy weather week.
Yes.
And we've already done this one, so I can let you go. I will just say that you know, if you shared your email in the chat box earlier, or if you'd like to do so now, we will send you the direct link to the recording and where you can get any of the handouts that Jane has so kindly provided to supplement what she's talked about. That would be terrific. You will also get updates there about our joining our mailing list, joining our Facebook page, which is the best way to find out about upcoming webinars. And it's possible that we will be able to get Jane back. She's got a big trip coming up, but if we can work it out, we may be doing sort of a part 2 of this session.
Angela, I just would like to say I'm glad I'm not in Buffalo where the wind chill is -38.
Yet. Stay tuned.
Yet. I think it's probably headed this way. Thank you.
Great. So thank you all for joining us. I'm happy to stay on and as is Jane, I'm sure, to answer any questions you have. But I also know that coming back from the holidays, your to-do list is probably long. So well, thank you again for joining us, and hope we'll see you again. And Jane, thank you again.
Well, thank you, Mary. Thanks for offering, or thanks to Ellen for actually asking me to do this, because I don't know if I would have volunteered. So it was great. It was helpful for me because we don't use Blackboard Collaborate here in Maine. We use an old version of Blackboard, but not Blackboard Collaborate. But
interesting.
So I read all of the tutorial, and then I read all of Vermont's information on the tutorial, and I have passed on to our IT people. I said, this is good. So do you know how long you've been using Collaborate? Blackboard Collaborate?
Well, you know, probably I would say 4 or 5 years now.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it keeps you know, updating and changing.
Absolutely.
But,
yeah.
It does everything technology, but yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I will go ahead and